Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me Dr. Joshua Black, and I'm really excited to interview Dr. Black because his field of expertise is a very unique field. He's a grief researcher, a speaker, an author, a consultant, online course instructor, and he's the host of the Grief Dreams podcast. He's focused all of his master's and PhD research in psychology on investigating dreams and bereavement, also known as grief dreams, and continuing bonds for many types of loss, including prenatal loss and pet loss. Most of his academic research and publications have specifically been on the dreams of the deceased. Dr. Black is considered one of the world's leading academic experts in grief dreams. Due to the lack of academic research in this field, Dr. Black has focused his efforts on raising awareness on grief dreams through doing talks, interviews, and developing an online grief dreams course. Additionally, developed a grief dreams website and runs several social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Grief Dreams. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Joshua Black.
Well, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today. We had to move this a couple of times because of some things with our calendars, but I'm really looking forward to talking about this field that people I think know a little bit about, but not a lot about. So how did you get involved in researching grief dreams?
It's a very interesting story that, it came really after my dad died. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. That was my focus for my entire life. Since I was a kid, I remember my dad telling me how that was the best job to have because it has a good pension and it's pretty well being paid in Canada anyways. That's where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent my whole life really going towards that. And then the fourth year, it took 5 years to finish my undergrad. The fourth year, my dad died and it changed absolutely everything. And so it was the first time I really experienced a death, a significant loss in my life. And it was completely devastating for me. I remember getting that phone call. He was supposed to pick me up. It was around my birthday and we were supposed to go to a hockey game together. And he just never showed up. And so I just thought he slept in. He had some health issues where it minimized what he could do. And so I just figured, maybe he was just, he had migraine or something. He just couldn't come. So I didn't think anything of it. 2 days later, I get a phone call from my aunt who basically said that, they found my father dead in his apartment and he was just collapsed on the floor. And for me, the amount of emotion that came out was so scary because one of the reasons, because I still am a guy, but I was at that time, I didn't feel comfortable crying. So I tend to not cry. I don't know when the last time I cried, probably when I was a kid. And so those emotions that are coming out, I haven't felt those for a very long time. And they just kept coming. The tears kept coming. And the negative thoughts and of the future of not being able to do stuff with them and not having any more memories, it really scared me in a lot of ways. And I had to sit with that. And I sat with that for about 3 days. I decided to do a eulogy, which was interesting in itself. I recommend everyone to do that. But yeah, I kept crying on stage for a good 5 minutes before I could speak. But the emotions, I couldn't believe how much emotion was coming out. With that. And one of the reasons I should say too, because me and my dad had a rocky relationship throughout our entire life. And one of the reasons was he drank a lot to cope with his emotions. And so he had a lot of trauma he never actually worked through. And so I was scared of him for the majority of my life. And we just never, clicked kind of thing until after my mom and him got divorced. And it was about that year and a half there. That's when we started rebuilding our relationship. And he acted a lot differently to me. I think there's a story in that for me because I think that's where the pain was coming from.
Mm.
Because if I always thought if he died maybe, 2 years earlier, I wouldn't have felt like that. I would have been like, okay, because I still had a lot of resentment, a lot of pain for him. But because of the friendship that we're really building, and he was becoming the father I always wanted, kind of thing,
Wow.
as I
Yeah.
was a kid. And
Yeah.
then for him to just die like that, it was such a shock, and it brought out all those emotions. I remember wanting to, after I got the news, I wanted to do something special for him. And I was actually really considering dropping out of school and going to Israel, which was a trip he wanted to take me on the following year. And I was really grateful looking back now. I had a partner who calmed me down and was pretty supportive to say, let's wait until you finish. You only have 1 year left of school.
Mm-hmm.
Let's, finish that, and then you can decide on if you should do that or not. And so I'm so happy for that, because it's amazing the irrational decisions we can make, when
Yeah.
we're in a state of grief. So
Yeah.
I was just so happy I had some support around me at that time. So
Mm-hmm.
anyways, I did the eulogy. I went back to school the next day, and all my sadness was gone. But the crazy thing was, all my happiness and joy was gone too. And so I was living in this weird gray state where, like, there was no color left in the world. And I was in that state for about 3 months. And I couldn't tell you, I tried everything, nothing really gave me joy it used to. And so I just
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh, this is life now. This is what
Yeah.
grief is. This is life. And it wasn't until I had a dream of my father that everything changed. And so this is where my love for that topic really started. And so the dream was, I was just in my room. It wasn't like a bizarre dream at all. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was in the dream, I was in my room, and everything in my room was the same way it was in waking life, which is, very unique in itself. At that time, I had a lot of clutter everywhere, so that is
Mm-hmm.
amazing detail to be able to
Yeah.
capture. And then a lot of other dreams that I have are, you tend to be like, weird stuff going on. So you'd wake up and you're like, oh, that was a dream. But this
Mm-hmm.
was it. It was very realistic in that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
saw my dad at the end of my room, and he looked so healthy. Like, I never, like, it wasn't even a memory, because I never even seen him like this before. His energy was very light. As I said, he had a lot of trauma and issues going on in waking
Mm-hmm.
life, so he always had this heaviness to him, where he just never dealt with his stuff. But here he felt so light. Like, his energy was just so beautiful, and he just looked so healthy. And I walked up to him and I said, I'm going to miss you, acknowledging the loss. And I said
Mm-hmm.
that I loved him. And then we hugged. And I woke up. And when I woke up, it was the most crazy experience, because everything changed. The color was back into the world. Like, I don't know. I didn't know. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed and saying, what was that? I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't interpreting the dream, but I felt something change in me because of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I still sit in the mystery of that moment, and I hear it a lot from other people, where the dream itself changes people. It's not really the interpretation. That can help in many different ways, but the dream itself had the power to change, like, where I was in my grief. And so I was able to have this joy back, and I was able to regulate my emotions. I could have tears, when I thought about him and stuff. So it was just really a beautiful, whatever that was, a very beautiful point in my life, because I don't know where it'd be. I'd probably still be in the gray, and I'd probably be doing something differently because of that dream. I then finished, school within probably, I think, 6 months after that, and I applied to be in teachers college, which was
Mm-hmm.
my goal the whole time. And the
Mm-hmm.
moment I got an interview to get in, I just felt something wasn't right. And so I turned it down, which was, for me, looking back, one of the craziest decisions I've made, because I had nothing going. I had no plan B. there
Wow.
is no there is no plan B. I was going off of feeling, and especially after grief, I don't know how wise that was, because that feeling could have been misleading in
Right.
many ways. But looking back, maybe because my dad was dead, I didn't have that pressure to do it, that unconscious kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think there was just another path that was just being led out for me. I just didn't know what that was. And that following year was just as scary as the grief, because I couldn't find work. And when I did find work, it wasn't fulfilling. I'm like, is this life? Is this life after, doing your undergrad? I'm like, this
Mm-hmm.
this isn't what they told me. They
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
all the jobs I wanted, you need a master's for. I'm like, I don't want to do a master's.
Right. Yeah. I understand that. Yeah.
I don't want to do any more school. And so I worked, these odd end jobs, and I wanted to find some meaning. So I went and volunteered at a hospice to help with the bereaved, and I did, one-on-one support and group support and group support.
Mm-hmm.
And they had these questions about these dreams. So some people were sharing these positive dreams. Other people were asking questions why they didn't have dreams. Other people want to know what these negative dreams meant. And, I didn't really know. I didn't know much about dream research at that time. And so I looked at the research. I still had an account from my school. So I looked at the publications that were available. And there wasn't anything when it came to these types of dreams that I could provide them to give them any kind of understanding. And I was really shocked by that because, I thought, most stuff's researched a lot, and a
Right.
lot of people are just almost like cleaning up the trail, like the laneways like paved, and they're just like every research study is just moving a little, like an inch forward.
Exactly.
But there was like nothing. There wasn't even a dirt road I could really go off of. And so I couldn't give him an answer. And then I had this moment where I was like, could I, like, because I knew the impact it had for me, and their questions really interested me. I thought, like, could I research this topic? Like, is that a possibility for me? And then in my mind, I'm like, well, you have to know stats, you have to know research methodology. I'm like, I don't want to know any of
Yeah.
that. I didn't want to be a researcher. And for a lot, so I was really scared to pursue that goal. But finally I settled down the nerves and said, you know what, why not give it a go? What's the worst that can happen? I don't get in, or I go and I fail. At least I tried. And I can say I tried.
Yeah.
Like, and so that's really, so I had to have courage to even like pursue this, and I did. And what amazing was that I actually got through, and like without some challenges, I gotta say I wanted to quit many times, and the support of my friends and the people who follow the topic and my
hmm
platform were really helpful and encouraged me how much this was needed.
hmm
And so when I was at the lowest points of my, I guess, master's or PhD, I had that to go off and say, we got to keep persevering this, like we got to keep doing this. And so it spent a lot of time, extra time. I felt like I was like 2 years behind everyone else, tell you the truth, because everyone wanted to be a researcher. Like when I asked my colleagues that are in their masters, they like, oh, I knew like when I started university. So like they already had this plan, and so they really valued, stats and research methodology. Which me,
hmm
I want to be a elementary school teacher, which I took those courses, but I
Right.
didn't, like I just got enough to get the good grade. Like I didn't retain any of the information. So I had to learn all that over again. And then when I got my PhD, it was less like, everyone was like super smart. And I had to really sort of, up my game on that too.
hmm
And, but I made it through, like at the end of the day, I made it through. And by the end of that 4th year, I was at par with everyone else, if not, in the sense of what I was doing a little
hmm
bit. My career trajectory was a little different because a lot of people wanted to do a postdoc and do all this other stuff and want to get into other areas. I'm like, this is the only topic I want to research. I don't want to be bothered with anything else other than this. And so I really directed a lot of my focus on doing talks and setting up the website and the podcast,
hmm
rather than, do more research studies outside of my field, which a lot of my colleagues were doing at that time. So I just had a different kind of, I think, plan on why I was researching the topic and then what I was going to do with it as I move forward. So that's where it all sort of happened. And when I was in my master's and PhD, those years, that's when I really realized how vast the topic is. Like before, I was just going off a couple of questions. But
hmm
once I got in and I started seeing the different biases, the different ways people see these dreams, and I started collecting the dreams and doing the research, I'm like, wow, this field is phenomenal. And it
Yeah.
really, changed the way I viewed these dreams in many ways, but also the way I approached them with people. And I think that's one of the most important things of why I'm doing these talks, is to validate the importance of this within the grief journey, but also how to use discernment and provide a safe space for people to actually share these experiences.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think it is such important work that again, I don't know if there's been much research done on it. I haven't heard of any, and I know that when we have these dreams, and some of us do, and frankly, some of us say they don't. Everybody wants them. I work a lot with parents who have lost children, and we're like, why can't I get more dream visits? I want a dream visit. It's such a but people like so. I want to just back up for us, and maybe you can explain it. What is actually a dream? Because we know we go to sleep, we have this thing that we feel, but what is a dream?
A dream is really any thought, feeling, or scene that you sort of remember when you wake up. And so that's sort of the definition of a dream. A lot of people think when it comes to dreams, it only happens in REM state, but it's not actually true. We
Mm,
actually dream throughout our sleep, so in non-REM and REM. There are
okay.
differences in the quality of those dreams. So
hmm
usually non-REM dreams are more bland, and in the REM dreams, you get more of the emotion that's going on. But at
Okay.
the, near the end of the night, it's not as true. And the other interesting thing is in REM, you tend to remember more dreams. So a lot of people would say if you remember a dream, it's probably from REM, because if you wake someone up, 80% of the time, they're going to be dreaming. In non-REM, it's around 50% of the time. And so there's just a little difference there. We don't know where these grief dreams fit in personally. Like you have to catch it in the lab to sort of understand where these powerful dreams come in. It's probably REM, but like at the end of the day, we just don't know. And I think that's the mystery of this topic, because they do act differently than other dreams, typical dreams anyways. So there is this mystery of what actually is going on in the brain when these happen. And so, yeah, so that's basically a nutshell of the dreams. And I should tell you some about dream research. So when it comes to dreams, 10% of the population doesn't remember dreaming, even though for our knowledge, everyone is dreaming. It's just the remembering is the issue. And so on average, 1 to 2 dreams a week, the public would say they would remember. And you can, change that based on, which is kind of, we can talk about that more, but you can increase your frequency of dreams as you move forward just by valuing the topic. So, keeping a dream journal, listen to this, and, talking about your dreams with others. If you're really trying to tell your mind that these are important now, our culture is really bad at valuing dreams. So why would you remember them, right? And so there's different ways to remember dreams a little bit better. We can go over that, if you want to. But then, right now, okay. So,
well, I do. I actually don't want to interject here, because my wife was one of those people for a long time would say, I don't think I dream because I don't remember my dreams. Yeah. But then after my daughter passed, and my other daughter was talking about dreams, and I was talking about dreams, and we do all these reading about dreams stuff. Now my wife is remembering her dreams a lot more often, and it goes to what you're saying, that valuing the dream makes a difference.
Yeah, it's so amazing too, and like the more you value it, and the more you write through your dreams down, the more you can have, and like the more you just remember anyways. And so like I remember like just trying this out. Like research has shown that just by doing that, it increases your recall rate. And so for me, I usually have, maybe 3 dreams a week. And I remember started doing this, and within a month, I was having 3 dreams a night that I could remember. And so I finally said, this is enough. This is because it kept waking me up, and I'd write down. And so finally, I'm like, I'm only writing down like the ones that I feel are more meaningful. And so then the rate of recall actually decreased. So you can increase and decrease based on that too, right? So
interesting. Wow.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And so what I want to sort of say when it comes to dreams, most people, so on average, most people will have negative dreams. And that's just because a lot of times we carry our stresses, our worries to bed, or we're watching the news, or we're watching a horror film or something that is going to be creeping into our dreams. And after trauma, what's interesting is that these dreams become even more consistently negative. And so you would think after grief would be very similar, in the sense that people are going to be having a lot of nightmares and negative dreams. If you just look at the pandemic right now, there has been research to show that there's been an increase in nightmares, increase of negative images for people. And you can just sort of see how that reflects the stress of an individual. And given a pandemic, it's a very stressful time for many reasons: financial. They said you have the grief stuff, someone dies, you have work, you have catching the virus and your own death and mortality, your loved ones, mortality. There's so much stress people are dealing with, even having to homeschool your kids. Like, I can't imagine what that would be like. But, like, you're going to bed with all that. And so dreams reflect our waking life. And people just need to understand that connection, because there's a lot of clues and a lot of things that you can learn from your dreams if you know how to sort of understand your dream language. And I think that's the most important thing, is that everyone has their own unique language when it comes to the dreams. As much as we want a quick fix and we want to just Google, what does an elephant mean, and then take that to mean what your dream means, it's not the best way of doing it. You're just going to sell yourself short, and you'll probably be led in a wrong direction. So like everyone's like symbol of an elephant would be different, but there's also a story that goes along with the elephant. It's very rare you just have an elephant and you wake up. You're usually riding the elephant, you're going around, you're meeting people or whatnot, right? So there's a story that goes along that helps people understand what the dream itself is trying to convey to the dreamer. Sometimes it's very passive, and it's just you working through the emotions of the day. But a lot of times it's, there's a lot of problem solving in there, and basically allowing you to see what you're working on still, because the mind is so great at tricking you to think you're further than you are in life. And it's so many times. I'll give an example of this just in the pandemic. When they're like that, there was that craze that everyone was buying toilet paper. So around that time, I was like, oh, I got this. I'm okay. I'm not too stressed. Like I had a smile on my face. I was going through life. And then I had this really crazy nightmare where I was in the house I grew up in, and there was a chandelier being taken down. And when it was taken down, I took some of the glass, and I started eating it. And then I started having like a panic attack because I realized the glass was stuck in my throat and I couldn't get it out.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up with just a deep sweat. Like for me, like the last time I had that was probably like maybe 7, 8 years ago. I'm pretty cognizant of my emotions in waking life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to work on them in waking life, so it doesn't have to affect me so much in my dream world. But anyway, so that was such a big trigger for me that there was something I wasn't catching, I wasn't seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really had to look at that because I'm like, I thought it was fine. Like, what's going on? And then I realized, like, okay, if this was someone else's dream, how can we look at this? I'm like, okay, what's a chandelier? Well, a chandelier provides light to a large space. I go, what's similar to that that's going on in my life right now? And so I started thinking, I'm like, oh, the news does that. The news provides stories to like a country, right? And so it's for a large space. So I'm like, if I'm breaking it off, I must be reading a lot of it and ingesting it. But what I'm ingesting is actually causing me great pain and suffering, and I don't know about it. I was like, this makes sense, because what I was doing at that time, as much as I felt calm, I was reading a lot of news throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually very detrimental to my mental health, and I didn't even know it. And so I really had to take a step back and say, okay, why are we looking at the news? Oh, to feel safe. How many times you need to look at it to feel safe? And I'm like, okay, maybe, once or twice. If it's going to happen, I bet you it's going to be like the headliner. You don't need to go on to 10 different articles to understand toilet paper is running out. Like, you just, right. And so I made a list. So I'm like, okay, how can I actively problem solve this? I'm like, okay, what do I need to feel safe? And so, you get some extra food and that sort of stuff. And like, is there anything else that you need? And it's like, no. So then, okay. So then the need to look at the news so often wasn't as important for me. And so it was just maybe once or twice in the morning, I'd look at an article, and that was it. I wouldn't look in at night. So that was the big thing. Like, I really stopped that. And I never had an experience like that since. I haven't had a nightmare since that day. So it's just really understanding that, there's a lot of knowledge that we can gain about ourselves. I always like to say dreams can be our best friend, who is, who can tell you the truth when you don't want to hear it. And I think that's sort of, what a best friend's supposed to be anyways, is to really give you the heads up on when you're off your rocker and thinking that you're going north, but you're really going south.
So is the dream our subconscious trying to communicate to our conscious mind? Is that what it is?
You'd think, yeah, right. But I know there's other people who have different theories of, based on their religion and based on their beliefs of the afterlife and stuff, they may see it as differently. But yeah, for me, it's just like, it's a guidance. If it comes from inside or outside of me, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm not too concerned. I'm just gonna use it.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. That's an excellent point. Because the thing is, as we talk about dream visits, people will say, well, I just have my normal dreams, and then I have my nightmares, and then I have my grief dreams or my dream visits. And they'll say it's a totally different quality of experience. It's kind of like the way you described the dream with your father. And you wake up and you feel there. It reminds me when people have NDEs, when they say it changed my entire perspective on everything.
And many of those dreams can be like that. And it's also, it's important to say, we talk about these positive dreams a lot. And I think a lot of the conversation does go there. But there's a lot of negative dreams that also happen that also have very similar qualities to some of the positive dreams. They're very vivid, they're very real, they're one-on-one. They may not give you a positive feeling, but they stay with you for your entire life too. So sometimes a lot of people who are spiritual take those as a haunting. And there's cultures that believe that is a negative visitation. So as much as a lot of, press goes to these positive dreams, there is a lot of negative dreams. And just in my study, I just sort of state, so when I looked at sort of how frequent these are in just the general public, I found that's one of the amazing things I found was like how common they are. So after spousal loss, within the first year or two, it was 86% of people had a dream of the deceased. After pet loss, it was 78%. And after prenatal loss, it was 58%. And then there was a study done with children, 55% had a dream after their parent died. And so it's when you start looking at those numbers, you realize how common these actually are. Then when you sort of look at, are they positive or negative experiences? Because if you remember when we talked about just how common negative dreams are in general, then after trauma, you would think a lot of dreams after grief would be negative too. So especially with the deceased in it.
Mm-hmm.
But as you're saying, this is where it gets interesting because it goes against typical dream research that most of these dreams are positive. So when
Yeah.
you ask someone, you know, the content, if you ever had a positive dream and you sort of give a layout on what that means,
Mm-hmm.
around over 90% of people will say they have at least one positive dream of the deceased. When it goes to negative, around 30%. And of those 30%, what's interesting is that those individuals will also have a positive dream at some point. And so
Mm-hmm.
what it says to me is probably is going on is that people are having more negative dreams in the beginning, and as they work through their trauma and their grief, they'll have more of these positive dreams moving forward. We don't know that for sure. We need to do
Mm-hmm.
more longitudinal research for that, but that is what I've heard on my podcast a lot, and what I've just heard with talking to other people. But yeah, there's something there, and I think within those beautiful dreams, so they're acting differently than normal, and as you said, like a lot of them have this very beautiful space that is being provided of just love and peace. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is absolutely amazing. Like the deceased will say amazing, like really wise stuff. They really help the dream out in many different ways,
Mm-hmm.
to feel loved, to deal with some of the problems they're facing. But just the presence of love is one of the things I find is the most remarkable, because a lot of times we seek that in life and never achieve it because we have so many worries and so much fear that is just under the surface. But
Mm-hmm.
in this dream, it's like none of that matters. It's like all you have is this space of love and what that can do to someone. And so when I look at my dream, yeah, I realize the importance of being able to say goodbye to my father because his death was sudden. I realize that saying I love you was an important aspect of that dream
Mm-hmm.
because I never said that to him, and probably since I was 6. So it's something that I needed to say that I never got a chance to say. Well, he never said it to me too, so let's not put the blame on me.
Right. Right. No, I
Yeah,
understand.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third thing was this peace. That peace in the dream was different than any other dream I had. Even the dreams that are positive I have don't have that level of peace in them. So there's something else going on that's probably very beneficial to us as we move forward through grief.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, as we're doing this or talking about this, I was thinking about recollection of dreams. We talked about how you can actually recall more dreams, but do we have any idea why we recall some dreams and don't recall other dreams, or why some people seem to recall a lot more than other people do?
Yeah, when it comes to dream recall, there are theories out there. Because we can't see each dream, it's very hard to understand why I remember certain dreams over others, especially
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the deceased. A lot of people will say, you remember dreams because the vividness of it. So the more vivid a dream or the
Mm-hmm.
more emotional dream is, would be different factors. If it's in REM, you may have a better, if you're waking up in REM, you may have a better chance of catching that because REM is very similar to our waking state.
Okay.
And so it could be that. But yeah, so there's still a lot of mystery on it. But when it comes to these dreams, it's very interesting because they tend to come up at very important times in people's lives. And so I'm not sure if they're just not remembering the dreams or they're just not occurring, right? That's a question that we won't know until we be able to see dreams in general. It could be people are dreaming of the deceased more than they're actually remembering it, and that's interesting. So then it's like, why are we remembering certain dreams at certain points in our life over others?
Mm-hmm.
We'll get back to grief to growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grief-to-growth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting because in the community I run in, a lot of people believe that we actually leave our bodies every night and we basically astral travel and we meet with our guides and the loved ones and stuff like that, and we don't recall that. So we're kind of back and forth between, two worlds. And so when we have these grief dreams, we call them dream visits, that we believe that we're actually with our loved one again. But with the grief dreams, have you noticed any like commonalities with the dreams versus regular dreams? And I give you some examples for me. It seems like they're usually the ones I have, they're really short. They're not very long. And when I would see my daughter, I would always know she's not supposed to be here. So I would get very excited because you would realize that, this isn't supposed to be happening. And then it would be somewhat lucid because I would know I was dreaming, and then I wouldn't want to wake up, but I would get excited and I'd wake myself up. So these are some of the things that I went through. Is that normal? Do other people have that?
I've heard that. Yeah, they definitely do seem shorter than other dreams. Even just the word count that I've collected, like I've collected over 1,000 dreams, and just when you compare that with other dream research, it tends to be a little shorter. But that also could be, what people are writing, because when I captured the data, I didn't go after a dream sample, which most people would in their research. I went after a grief sample. So a lot of people, you would assume, are not dream enthusiasts, so they're not, wanting to talk about their dreams. So maybe that's the reason why it's a little shorter, because they just didn't add enough detail to the dream. They sort of just cut to the chase of maybe what was most important to them. So yeah, we still have to do more research on that. But yeah, a lot of people will say that, they'll know the deceased is dead, or they'll know that they're dreaming. It's not as common as I think. Like for me, like I knew my dad was dead, but I wasn't lucid in the dream.
Okay.
Right? Like I didn't realize it was a dream in that moment. A lot of people are like that, where they could acknowledge the person's dead, but they won't say this is a dream and become that lucid. What was the other one you were saying?
Well, I was saying
lucid.
It's short, it's lucid. And then for me, I would like always get excited about seeing her, and I would wake up and I didn't want to. So I'm like, yeah. So I started actually trying to, when I was in it, say, okay, just don't get too excited. Yeah.
Hey, that's just love right there. That's just excitement. And, at the end of the day, the dream may have ended even if you didn't get excited, but at the end of the day, it's just something to smile at. But that's how much love you have, for your daughter, to be able to see her, and for you to sort of take it as a visit. It makes it that much more special to you, believing that it was her, right? And so, like there's just something to smile at and say, oh, all right, okay, like how can you change that without like trying to decrease I don't know, like I think that is one of the most important parts of the dream, is just feeling that, and that's just love coming to the surface, you know?
Well, like you said, there is that, and you can't really even describe the feeling of love, but it's one of those things, it when you have it. And I found that when people have that, I know a lot of people have had these types of dreams, and like, I could just feel the love. You could feel that they're okay. It's that reassurance that they're okay, that we're going to be okay. But it's interesting because a lot of times people will take those positive dreams to be a visit, but then the negative dreams will say, well, that was just a dream. But is there something to be learned from the negative dreams also?
Of course, yeah. Well, first is just using discernment, right? Some people who, as I said, will take those dreams as a visit also, depending on where they are in their grief, right? And so it's just really understanding, like when we call things a dream visit, it's just really understanding that actually complicates a lot of things for people in many different forms. And just before I go on the negative dreams, people, just in my own research, when you look at who are having these dreams, like that was one of the common concerns, that why I started the research was, why is some people having these dreams and other people aren't? And so the spiritual people would always put themselves down if they haven't had a dream, right? They'll be jealous of others. They'd say, oh, maybe he didn't cross over properly. Maybe he's mad at me because I had to like maybe sell the house or something, or I couldn't give him that type of funeral he wanted. Or maybe, the afterlife is they forgot about me, kind of thing. And so I wanted to give a scientific explanation to sort of understand that a little bit more. And so what I found in replicating the research is that dream recall was the most important factor. So what it's saying is that people who remember more dreams in general remember more of these types of dreams. Wow. I think that's interesting. And for a lot of people, when you start asking them if they didn't have a dream, what their recall rate is, usually it's pretty bad and pretty poor. And so I usually connect the dots for them. And for them, you could see this weight goes off them, because all those reasons, negative reasons where they put on it are now sort of disvalid. And now, because of the research, people can hold on to that and say, oh, like I just didn't remember maybe the dream that I did have. But within that study, so in both studies, I looked at spirituality, because a lot of people thought, so I wasn't going to put it in, but people sort of made me put it in, and thought that people who are spiritual will have more of these dreams. I guess it's a good theory. Anyways, it's not true. So people who are spiritual or not are both having similar dream experiences. The difference is in the content. So maybe in a spiritual person, they'll talk about the afterlife, or they'll talk about, I don't know, what heaven looks like or what death is like, something like that. Where in people who are not spiritual, they won't, but they still have that loving quality. They'll even say they're okay. Like they still have those kind of comments. They'll still say that they love them, but they just won't have that other stuff in it. So, but for those people, what I wanted to sort of mention, why when we label these as maybe a dream visit to some, how it can put off others, because if you're not spiritual, your guard and your wall goes up the moment you hear it's a visit, and you don't want to share those experiences anymore. And so I really try to get people to understand that, it's the quality of the dream, I think, the most important to ask, and then ask how they feel about it. Because some people, based on their culture, religion, that is not, that would be frowned upon in many ways to call it a dream visit, right? But it's a great moment together, and whatever you call that, living in the mystery of that moment. And that in itself can allow people to share these a little bit more freely, because most people hide them if they don't get asked. And I think that's why people thought it was rare. But, for a spiritual person, they'll let you know right away if they think it's a visit, because, like they'll say just the wording they use. And I think that's beautiful. And I never discourage that, because I've seen it even in my research, how these dreams help people believe more in an afterlife and help people regain their faith, which is really rocky after someone dies, to understand sort of like, how could this happen? And so you can sort of see how it's beneficial to people. And when it comes to these negative dreams, these dreams has been shown, just in my research, when they're distressing, that they relate to trauma symptoms, and they also relate to unresolved feelings of guilt or blame. And so a good example of this is just understanding, like, dreams represent our waking life. So a good example was a widow. Said like her husband died, and she had this dream, a repeated dream, of her husband coming to the door and telling her that he's still alive, and then basically wants to get back together with her. But she says, "Oh no, I'm dating someone new. I can't." And she's like, "How can you still be alive? Like, how could you make me think that you're dead? And like, how could you be such a mean and heartless person to do something like that to me?" And then he said, like he's like, "Well, if we're not going to be together, well then give me all the money that you inherited, then I'll leave you alone." And she said no, and then he began to chase her. And so she had this repeated dream over and over again. She thought it was a negative visitation. And then when you start asking about these points in the dream that you'd say are important, the one is getting back together and her being in a relationship. And so that's one of the issues, right? Like, how difficult it is for someone who has a partner die and then to start a new relationship. Like, you're trying to love two people at the same time. And it's very difficult in our culture because it's always been frowned upon. And so for them, like, you have to sort of figure that out. And then you have the difficulty of the other partner. Do they even want to know about the partner that died? Are they even, or are you hiding your love to make them, feel better, kind of thing?
Right, exactly.
And it's a very difficult position to be in. And then on top of that, you have this money. So when you ask her about the money, she said the hardest thing after the death was actually accepting the money, because he worked so hard for it, and she felt it was so unjust that he worked so hard and she's the one that gets suspended or keep it. And so she's sort of working through that still, and she's spending some of that money on the new relationship. So you see that there's this complex thing going on, and the mind's trying to say, you got to work through this, because whatever you're doing isn't working. And because a dream is repeated like that, it is a flag that, there is something that you're not getting in waking life. The mind's really good. If you're not going to get it, it'll tell you again, either in the same way or in a different story. But if you track your dreams over weeks, you can sort of really see if you're making progress or not based on the themes that are coming up.
I've been having the same dream for years.
That's right. Well, there's something important there, right? And these dreams can trigger, especially your feelings can trigger certain dreams. And there's probably clues in there to help you understand that, because they're not, like, I don't feel they're random at all. They're really telling a story to us to really help us be more healthy in waking life.
Yeah. I want to reiterate a couple of things you said, because you said some really profound things there that I really want to make sure the listeners heard. One is, when people say, "I'm not having these dream visits, there's something wrong with me, my loved one's mad at me, or this, we don't have the connection," or whatever. I think it's really important to, like you said, to ask, how many dreams are you recalling in general? And that the fact that there's a correlation there. So hopefully that'll take a lot of pressure off of some people. And there are ways that we can improve our dream recall, as you said, by valuing it, by journaling. I think setting an intention. I've heard people say, I want to have a dream, just maybe triggering that subconscious thing. But I also wanted to ask you about, you had this visit or this dream with your father. I using the visit word. You had this dream with your father, and it changed your life. What was your belief in the afterlife before that? Did it change that, or what were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know. It was very interesting because when I look back at that, I am spiritual, but when I look back, like I wasn't asking for a dream at that time. And I think I'm still developing my faith in
Mm-hmm.
many ways, as I still am, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
trying to understand this crazy world, and then and understand myself. As I learn more about myself, my idea of God or whatever changes significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, when I even look at that dream, I don't think I ever even classified it as a visitation. It was just a dream that changed me. And I still
Mm-hmm.
look back, I'm like, would I even say it's a visitation? I don't know, because it was just something that changed. I didn't put it wasn't a interpretation. I don't think I've ever really put an interpretation on that dream per se. It was just me. It was just how crazy it was. It changed me. And that love, it's a thing that I keep
Right.
the most. And like, I don't, like at the end of the day, I don't know, right? And I don't know if it really even matters to me. But what I do know for certain is that dream changed me. And so what can I learn from that dream as I move forward? And it's just really, I think, what's possible when it comes to love. And so my goal has not been trying to prove the afterlife is real. Really, it is or it isn't. I'm going to die and it's going to happen or not. Like, it's not like my belief isn't going to determine anything. But what can I do now? I'm like, okay, I can learn what's possible for a human. And I think that there are different levels of love. And if
Mm-hmm.
I can dream a scene like that or an emotion like that, why can't I live that in waking life? And so that's always been my goal moving forward, is try to get to that place in waking life,
Mm-hmm.
and not just need a dream to get me there. Like, I'm really working hard to really try to understand, myself, who I am, what stresses me out, what am I attached to, and what's holding me back from love. And a lot of people, I say, like, we do get attached to these experiences because they make us feel good. But then when we go to waking life, we're like, I just want another one, rather than saying,
Yeah.
what can I do to increase the chances I can actually have that while I'm awake? And I
Yeah.
think that's where I'm at. It's less about, what is after, and more about what can I do now. And a lot of these dreams that people share, they have so much wisdom that I gain from them. So that's why I love asking about these dreams, because there's so much you can take from it,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to what love is and the words that they say. It's just very remarkable, for where I'm sitting, to be able to utilize these dreams as a way to rethink what life is and how to process how I see myself as I move forward.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about, I don't know if you've even heard of this phenomenon or not, but I've heard of people where someone will be deceased and someone else will have a dream where they'll come and visit them and tell them they're okay before anybody even knows this person has been deceased. Have you heard about this happening?
This is where it gets really wild when it comes to these these dreams, because even on my website, there's these like I put these people who can have these dreams, as you said, before they even know the person's dead. And I think there is something very beautiful about that, and to allow people to sit in mystery. There's a lot about life we don't know, and to think that we do know, even to think that we know what the afterlife is just, I think, insane in itself, because we just don't know. But we
Mm-hmm.
do know that, like, to believe that there is one, okay, but to understand what it's like, I don't know if we can even conceive of what that is with
Right. Right.
with our minds, right? And so there's a lot of times we have to sit in the mystery of life and to understand that we may be wrong in different ways, but there's certain things that you can be certain of. Anyway, so these dreams really make you sit in that mystery, because they're having dreams very similar to what someone would have after they know of the death. So the
Mm-hmm.
person somehow at that moment knows of the loss. And that could be, so like some people would say, oh, that's they visited them in the dream, and so they let them know that they basically died and they're going to be okay. So that's one possibility. The other is, let's say, if you're not spiritual, there must be a connection that people have that goes beyond time or in space, that people just know. And I hear that with, like, parents with their children, they just know something's wrong. They almost have
Mm-hmm.
this like radar, and they call when something is. And so there could be these strings of just of attachment and then love that allows us to know when someone has died too. So either way, whatever the possibility, it changes the way we understand human beings just by the occurrence of that. And
Yeah.
other times when it comes to, I think, some other dreams you're saying about people having dreams for others, I think that is a really fascinating topic. And I collected a lot, and people came on my podcast and talked about it. It's more rare, but someone could have a dream that's actually meant for someone else, in the sense that the
Mm-hmm.
character in the dream, so the deceased, will tell them to share a message with
Yeah.
their father or their mother or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And sometimes a person doesn't even know or really is that close to that individual. And so it takes a lot of courage for someone to have a dream and then share it, because it could end up really someone calling you crazy, or they just don't believe you, stuff like that. But for the most part, a lot of people have said the powerful impact it has on others. And a lot of times they never had that dream themselves. So it's very interesting when you start looking at that, and that's more research that needs to be done on that topic, because it does change the way we see ourselves and like what's possible with us. And there's just so much more we just don't understand. We're trying to like, I guess, go on Mars and land on Mars, and we don't really even understand our like what we are capable of, right? Like it's very interesting how we keep pushing the boundaries externally, but internally it's still really similar to where it was prior.
Yeah, well, these are some of the reasons that I believe there's something more to it than just our subconscious. Is, that phenomenon I've heard of happening, not often, but it happens where people will dream about someone else being deceased before they even know. And if you just mentioned another one. Well, it's almost like they can't get through to the one that they're trying to get through to, so they'll go to the cousin or the aunt or the neighbor down the street even, and say, and the neighbor will come up and say, I had a dream about your daughter last night. I barely knew her, but she came to me and came to tell you that she's okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful when people have the courage to be able to actually share that. And I do want to sort of mention, when we talk about some of these, positive dreams, there is a category that should be of concern, and for anyone who works with the bereaved, and that's a theme called "Come Join Me." And here, so kids can have this, it seems, and then also adults, but it's where the deceased is either dragging the dreamer basically to the afterlife.
Wow.
Or the dream or the deceased is trying to convince the individual to basically kill themselves to join them in the afterlife. And it's a very positive scene in the sense of how the person's interacting with the individual. But these are really rare, but they seem to sort of point to mental health issues and suicide ideation. And so, in my studies, I sort of saw how people who had those types of dreams had really high forms of trauma symptoms. And then there's been other people it's highly related to complicated grief. And you see it even across cultures with the indigenous people in Georgia. And so their thing is, if someone ever has that type of dream, means they're going to die soon. That's the myth. And so I think if you're in a hunter-gatherer society, if you're dealing with trauma, you're not going to be, your memory's going to be off, your cognition's going to be off, and reaction time. So I can see you slipping, or it could be that they do kill themselves also. And I, when we say ask about these dreams and understand where it is, because if you tell someone, these are dream visits, right? All of a sudden that person will say, oh, then I'm supposed to kill myself to go to the afterlife, because it is a positive dream. That's why we really have to ask, what's the dream before we label it, just to know will that complicate the individual's bereavement in any way, and what are their beliefs? And so, with that, I can definitely see people probably have taken their life because of some of these dreams, because they believed it was what they were supposed to do. And in grief, like our cognition's not the greatest. Like our impulse control and reaction time, in the sense of what we do. I was about to go to Israel and like drop out of school, right? So if I had one of those dreams, how easy it is, for someone to just take that next step because they believe the dream was telling them the truth. And so just being aware that there's so many types of dreams that I've seen, that I think I am in a privileged position to understand the landscape, which, that's why I'm really trying to talk about this stuff, because a lot of people only hear certain aspects, and a lot of them are these positive dreams, and that's beautiful and it's great, but there's also this other landscape that hasn't been talked about. And that's sort of the importance of understanding and using discernment when we sort of talk about these dreams, and how people's beliefs in how they interpret their dreams affect the grief journey.
Yeah, that's some really another excellent point you made there about that. Because it's interesting as you were telling your path, how you were doing one thing in your undergrad and you decided to go into psychology and go into dream research. My daughter, when Shayna passed away, my daughter Kayla was in the medical. She was on a path to become a physician's assistant. And after Shayna passed, she realized this is not really what I want to do. So she changed. She majored in psychology in her undergrad, and then went on to get her master's in mental health counseling. Wow. So, it's interesting that like when we're in grief, we have to be careful about making big decisions, because our cognition's not great, but also it can actually put us on the path that I think that we're meant to be on. I'll use that. I think that, and you took this dream that you had from your father, and you said, okay, this changed your life. It changed, your life work. And people might have heard of this. And I was looking at your website before I got on, so I'll give you, but I'd heard it before too, about Paul McCartney. After his mother passed, and everybody knows the song "Let It Be." And there's a line in the song, Mother Mary comes to me, and everybody assumes this is the Virgin Mother. But Paul McCartney had a dream of his mother after she passed coming to him. And the lyrics are, "When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she's standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom." And that song is just so profound. And as he's relating this dream to James Carville, like 50 years later, not James Carville, what's the guy's name?
James Corden.
James Corden. Yeah, as you're relating it to him 50 years later, you can see him tearing up. I mean, you can see that dream still impacts him to this day. So I think there's something very profound about these dreams.
Well, I hear from a lot of people, they still remember these dreams, 40, 50 years later, and they still remember how it feels. Like that feeling of love can still be, they can still look back at that and carry that with them in many ways. And it provides them that comfort as they move forward. And for a lot of times, it's that thing that actually, when people look back, it can be that thing that really helped them work through their grief in many ways. I've had, people that were about to kill themselves have a dream with the deceased, talking them out of it. People who are, addicted had a dream and it changed them. And so like, you can see like the significant moments and of people's grief journey change because of these dreams. That's why like, it's really interesting how a lot of people don't share them. There wasn't any research on them because we're like, oh, people are just resilient. Well, it could be they're also having these dreams that are helping them become resilient and to work through some of the stuff outside of, let's say, traditional means. And I think, that is a very beautiful quality of these dreams. And it's like, why shouldn't we? We should know as much as we can, because it seems that there is some type of inner knowing or knowledge that is guiding us to how to work through grief. And if we can understand the concept of what's going on, we could work and help people a lot better in waking life. Because there's so much wisdom. Even I said, Paul McCartney, "Let It Be." Like, I remember hearing that, I was so shocked because I was in love with that song. And now I'm like, wow, like that makes it even more beautiful.
Yeah.
And the way he said, like, and there's so many. So even on my website, griefdreams.ca, there's so many other points in movies and TV shows that capture these dreams. When I started looking, and I started like every time I look at a movie or it comes up, I'm going to write down. And like the amount of shows and places where I've seen these dreams, you can tell it's affecting a lot of people, that they're putting it in their movies and they're putting in their TV shows in ways that are capturing the importance and the beauty of the topic for the most part. There are a couple that will put in negative dreams. And I think that's beautiful too, because it just showcases and raises awareness. But the beauty of these dreams help change people. I remember just on a side note, one of my favorite movies growing up was Braveheart. And one of the reasons was my dad's favorite movie was Braveheart too. So we always watched it together. And then, I never realized until I was in my master's program, I put the movie on again. And there's 3 grief dreams in there of him dreaming of his deceased wife. And I think that's probably the record. I haven't seen more than 3 right now, but like, I go, how interesting that is. One of my favorite movies that I was tied to actually had these experiences, and I didn't even realize it, wasn't conscious of it until after I started, looking for these around. And I think, there's something to say about that. And I think there's something special about that just in my own journey, where I look back and like my dad's tied these dreams. It's not just I had my own, but it was in one of our favorite movies that we had together.
That is wild. That is really cool. So tell me about what you offer to people. I know you've got a course, you do one-on-one work. So tell me about what you offer.
So to raise awareness, I was doing, before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of talks and workshops. And so that kind of stopped. And so I decided to do an online course. And so it's 9.5 hours that someone could take. And it really helps you understand, some stuff on sleep, dreams, but, the majority it's on grief dreams. And all the landscape, like we talked about an hour. So it's probably another 9 hours of like conversation on the topic that we just didn't go into, because it's so vast in the sense of what's there. So if someone wants to learn more and wants to talk about these more, I think that's a great starting point. You get a certificate at the end of it. And then, for those people who, have these negative dreams or just want to talk more about these dreams, I offer the one-on-one grief dreams consulting. And just, it's sad. There's not a lot of people that know the information. So I'm just trying to help people the best I can to understand how a lot of clients that have negative dreams. And so it's really, how it applies to waking life and what it's trying to teach us to move forward with that. And then you said, like, I got the Grief Dreams podcast. So people who want to know more about just want to hear more of these stories, like, that's the place to go, because a lot of the people that come on, majority of them have really positive, life-changing experiences. And I think that's phenomenal. Even the last guest we had on was Zingara, and she talked about, meeting her, I think it was her grandfather, and she asked about the afterlife, and then he told her what the afterlife was like. And I kind of think that's kind of cool, in the sense of these answers and questions people have about life, they can get from the deceased too. So
yeah,
that's
I love what you're saying, and it's interesting because I've studied near-death experiences to a fair amount, and the grief dreams remind me of that without the trauma. You can have some of these experiences, and I also love the way you put it. You don't have to believe it's the afterlife. You might believe it's inner wisdom or the subconscious, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
But there is you cannot deny the wisdom of it. You cannot deny the message of it, the beauty of it, and the way that it can transform, people's lives. So I think the work that you're doing is just so very important. And I love just a short amount of time we've been able to spend together today. I've learned a lot, in terms of there are types of dreams I didn't know. I didn't know about the come with me, dream. How maybe we can interpret these negative dreams. I thought you got a great example of that woman, with her husband and the other person in the life. And it's got to be a really complex situation. You said trying to, honor your one that's on the other side, but live your life while you're still here. So seeing that come through in the dream and being able to understand what the dream is trying to tell you. So it's all just amazing.
It absolutely is. And that's why I love talking about it. And one thing we didn't mention is how these dreams change over time. So after you work through your grief, and so it's not really, your dreams aren't about grief anymore. And these dreams of the deceased will pop up in times of other needs that you have, and times of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say if you get divorced or something, you may have, or something tragic happens, you may have one of these dreams, and it's been 10 years since the individual died, but they're offering you support and comfort. I've seen a lot in the pandemic now, which is very interesting, of how the deceased are coming to offer support in many different ways, either just being together to reduce the isolation, or to provide them questions, or asking how they're doing in the pandemic. And then at end of life, which is interesting, you'll start seeing these dreams again, and they're basically helping people transition from life to death. So they're providing a lot of comfort for the individual in those final days. And I think that's one of the other really unique things of this research, or just this topic, is that, it's not just one dream at one moment of life. It's
right.
Like, once it happens, it keeps happening in certain moments of your life that are very important. And so, like, why is that, and how come we don't have those dreams prior? Like, I don't know. Like, but there's a lot of mystery and a lot of research that still needs to be done. So hopefully people know it's a safe space now to, I think, explore research-wise. I think, that's maybe one of the reasons why people didn't do research prior, because it was really tied with the afterlife a lot. But I think it did a really good job to say, no, like, everyone's having these. Let's just talk about the subject in a non-judgmental way, and people can take it as they want. Like, I'm not, as long as it's comforting, like, I don't really care what you take it as. It's when it's distressing, let's work on that, because that's going to cause you to limit what you can do and where you can go with your healing.
Yeah, well, you mentioned something that I taken a note, and I hadn't brought it up, but I guess we have a couple more minutes, so I do want to get into it, because my father-in-law near the end of his life had dementia, and he would talk about all these things, crazy, like dreamlike things. So my theory was he had lost the separation between dream life and real life. I'm like, I don't know what was going on with him, but when he would talk about people in his fantasies, they were always deceased, like consistently. There were always people who were deceased. And I thought that was a really interesting observation. I did not make at the time. But later on, as I look back on, I'm like, it seemed to me like he was like tapping into the other side as he got closer to the end.
Yeah, and that, there's research that's been done, a lot of research coming out of Hospice Buffalo with Dr. Kerr and Dr. Pay Grant, that are really looking at these end-of-life dreams and visions. And it's very hard to separate the two at end of life, because their sleep is so sporadic. But same thing. So they're having these dream experiences, and sometimes it could be the dream experiences tied into waking life, so it becomes a vision. But yeah, they're there, and their research found that tends to be an increase in these as they approach the end. And so that in itself is it's very fascinating to me on, how these continue to support us, and why can't we have them every day? Like, why do they show up just at quote unquote random? I don't know. And I think, that's one of those mysteries that you just have to sort of sit with and be patient. And I think if anything, like, we teach our kids to be patient, I guess these dreams teach us to be patient as adults.
Yeah, well, even the word afterlife, because to me, what it says is consciousness is something that is bigger than we understand. It's not just in our brains. There's something that's everything. It's undeniable. We're somehow connected to something larger than ourselves or to each other in some ways that we don't understand from a materialist point of view. And I love the way you're going about it academically. It's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of I have to believe this, but also not to shy away from the fact that these things are actually happening.
Yeah. I'm glad you like that, right? Some people may frown upon some of the stuff I'm doing, and I've just because of their belief system and what they sort of see these dreams to be. And so, yeah, it's just, the love and support that, you give for allowing me to be on your platform, and then everyone else. I just sort of thank you all for continuing to raise awareness on the subject, because it's just so important to my heart. But I know it's impacting a lot of people just around the world. And I think for me to do research that's affecting the world is such a place of, I'm in such a place of gratitude, because most people, their research never gets read. And for this to have an opportunity to actually change the way we support people, in just a matter of doing a master's and PhD, I think that's just a remarkable part of where I'm sitting at, that like the legacy of just my father is actually moving through the world.
Yeah.
And for me, like that means a lot.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Well, I want to tell people where they can reach you. It's Dr. Joshua Black, and he's at griefdreams.ca. So you can find more questions and answers on his website. The course is available there. You're available for one-to-one consulting. So I'm so thrilled to put this episode out. I think it's a really important episode that'll help a lot of people.
Hey, I'm happy about that. And thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate you valuing the topic.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Sweet dreams, eh? Hopefully you get another one of those dreams tonight.
Yeah, really. So that does it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you enjoyed it. If you like this content, make sure you subscribe. So click on the subscribe button here, and then click on the bell to receive notifications, and click on all. That way you'll be notified whenever I release new content. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.